Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, so today we're going to debunk a massive historical myth. We always hear that the Ottoman Empire, literally one of the longest-lasting political orders in world history, fell suddenly, just shattered by the dramatic events of World War I. But the truth? It's way more complex and, honestly, far more fascinating. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the slow, structural erosion that was hollowing out the empire long before the first shots of the Great War were ever even fired.
I mean, seriously, how does a 600-year-old empire actually die? To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look right past that visible, explosive end in 1918 to find the true underlying causes of death. Because this collapse wasn't an overnight thing. It was the culmination of decades of crushing internal and external pressures.
We often think of the 19th century Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe, right? That label kind of paints this picture of an empire just waiting around to get conquered by foreign armies. But the profound truth revealed in our sources is that the empire was actually conquered by European banks way before it was dismantled by their militaries. World War I? That was really just the tip of the iceberg, the visible symptom of a terminal illness.
Let's look at how this spiral actually happened. Back in 1854, desperate for cash during the Crimean War, the Ottomans took out their first major foreign loans. And what started as an emergency lifeline quickly morphed into an invisible conquering army. By 1875, the empire defaulted. Then, in 1881, European creditors essentially just took over. They established the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a European-staffed agency that seized direct control of key Ottoman taxes, like those on salt and tobacco. In doing so, they completely stripped away the empire's fiscal sovereignty.
And here's the harsh reality of it all. The central Ottoman government simply possessed an inability to generate reliable state revenue on its own. While the empire was trying so hard to modernize its military and bureaucracy, it literally couldn't do it without relying on punishing foreign credit. The traditional agricultural tax base just couldn't support a modern, centralized state.
There's this quote from the text that absolutely hits the nail on the head. Sovereignty is not lost all at once. It is negotiated away incrementally through agreements presented as unavoidable, technical, or temporary. So debt didn't destroy the state overnight. Instead, it steadily, relentlessly shrank the space for independent political decisions. When wars broke out or reforms were needed, the empire had zero budgetary flexibility. Their priorities were totally subordinated to keeping those European creditors happy.
To really put this into perspective, just look at the staggering asymmetry in these numbers from 1900. The Ottoman Empire had a state income of about 330 million Dutch guilders. Now compare that to its greatest rival, Russia, sitting at over 2.1 billion. The Ottomans had just a tiny fraction of the peacetime income of competing empires. In an era of massive modern arms races, survival for the Ottomans was basically becoming mathematically impossible.
And it wasn't just money. This mathematical impossibility extended to human resources, too. Massive territorial losses, especially during those brutal Balkan Wars, trapped the empire in a vicious cycle. Losing rich, densely populated land in Europe meant losing taxable citizens and potential military conscripts. Think about it. Without those territorial losses, their 1914 population would have been around 42.5 million. Instead, it was a mere 26 million. Fewer men meant further military weakness, which just led to even more territorial losses.
So that brings us to the failed fix, why modernization couldn't save the empire. Faced with these crippling deficits in both money and men, the Ottomans didn't just sit idly by. They attempted massive structural reforms. But as we're going to see, just adopting the outward forms of a modern state couldn't overcome the loss of true modern power.
This desperate need to fix things led to two very divergent paths of reform. Early on, you had the Tanzimat ideal. This was the dream of a unified, secular, multi-ethnic identity called Ottomization, aiming to give equal rights to everyone. But ultimately, that ideal fractured. Under the intense pressure of foreign encroachment and rising local nationalisms, a new generation of leaders, the Young Turks, became completely disillusioned. They ended up abandoning that multi-ethnic unity in favor of a much harder line of Muslim and eventually Turkish nationalism.
Which brings us to the ultimate catalyst, World War I. Power got highly centralized under a rigid Young Turk triumvirate, who made the fateful decision to ally with Germany. The historical sources outline how the war awakened deep paranoias, leading the regime to view Christian minorities as disloyal, which tragically resulted in the devastating Armenian deportations and genocide. Meanwhile, the military was in total disarray, literally starving and unequipped. Arab provinces rebelled alongside the British, finally shattering any remaining illusion of Ottoman unity. By the time they dragged the empire into this war, The state was practically a shell of its former self.
When you look closely at the history, over a century of continuous military defeats forced these radical administrative and educational westernization efforts. But because their economic sovereignty had been surrendered decades prior, those westernization efforts simply didn't have the foundation required to actually save the imperial system.
Zooming into the final blow and the eventual rebirth. In the 1920 aftermath, the victorious Allies dictated the incredibly punitive Treaty of Severus, which literally partitioned the Anatolian heartland. But unlike other defeated powers of World War I, Turkish nationalist forces under Mustafa Kemal, who we later know as Atatürk, flat out refused to accept it. They kept fighting, abolished the Ottoman Sultanate entirely, and forced the world back to the negotiating table to sign the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, establishing the Sovereign Republic of Turkey.
But, and this is a major point, this new peace and sovereignty came at a staggering human cost: 1.3 million. That is the number of people abruptly uprooted by the Treaty of Lausanne's mandated population exchange. It forced the unmixing of roughly 900,000 Ottoman Christians who were sent to Greece and 400,000 Greek Muslims who were sent to Turkey. Most of these people were resettled in homelands they had never even seen before.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Did the Ottoman Empire actually die? Or was it violently transformed into a modern nation-state at the expense of its diverse cosmopolitan soul? The long death of the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a sudden military defeat. It was a decades-long surrender of sovereignty that reshaped the entire Middle East, and that is a legacy we are quite literally still living with today. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.